Hello, my name is Greg Anderson. I'm with the WIS HO Railroad Modeler Group. We're based out of Milton, Wisconsin right now. Our group was started in November of 1994, so we're starting our 21st year as an organization, which is a very loose-knit organization. We have one officer, it's treasurer. He's been the treasurer since day one and still is to this day. We have a modular railroad group, which means sectional track is put together in various ways, in any kind of circle or anything like that. It's up to NMRA standards, which is the National Model Railroad Association standards on how modules are built, so that any particular group that subscribes to that standard can join these modules together. As I said, we're based out of Milton right now. We're in the old Dog and Suds restaurant, drive-in, that was enclosed several years ago. And we were in the old inside dining area of that. We're set up there between usually May through November. We have 3 open houses in the summertime when the Milton House is open on usually it's the 3rd Saturday of the month. Like I said, May through September. It's probably those dates. It varies depending on what we want to do. And we're also open when Milton House has special events also. Four of our modular sections are based of the Milton area, Milton Junction area of the 1930s. We have brought that module down here on occasion, but right now it's in the club room area set up. So we have new members that are bringing in new modules. So the old ones sort of go by the wayside, but we still use them from time to time. We do 3 shows a year. We've been doing the library show here, I think, since about 1998. And then we do a Madison show, which is usually in February, and the Rockford show, which is usually in March. And we've been doing those shows for at least 16 to 17 years. So, and we don't do any specific locations for our modules. Everyone can basically build whatever they want on the modules. A few of our members have gotten together to coordinate certain sections. It's going to become more of a sectional modular system than just a generic sectional layout. But basically that's about it. Yeah, one of our members sort of coined that early on. We didn't have a name for about 3 years, I think. And that sort of stuck because we had a lot of members, well, not a lot, but we had members that were from South Beloit, Brockton, state line area people. And we have members from, like I say, Milton, Evansville, Beloit, and Janesville. So we just figured that was a good name to utilize. We have sort of a schedule that we usually meet the third Tuesday of the month at the Milton House. In the upper level, they have a conference area. It's called the Toma Room. It varies from 6:30 to 7 o'clock. I think right now it's 7 o'clock. Anyone is welcome to come to those meetings, but I would check our website. Usually during what we call the show season, which is, like I say, starting in January through March, we may have 1 or 2 meetings that we don't do. It all depends on how much has got to be discussed. Usually those are for the logistics of moving the stuff, who's going to take what, how many people are going to be there, who can we depend on. Our membership month is usually October. That's when we make decisions on who, if people like us, have been around for a while, then we will let them join if they still want it, if they can put up with us. But it's like, we want to know you, you got to know us. We just don't want you to throw you into a situation. There's a financial fee of a initial membership fee, and then usually we have annual dues. It depends on how much money we need. We don't just raise money for the sake of having money in the bank. We use it. If we get money, we use it. And we do pay a volunteer rent to the Milton Historical Society that we suggested. And we do suggest that you also become a member of the Milton Historical Society, and that's a $20 annual membership fee. But I think it sort of strikes a note that this group has been around for 20 years and is still going strong. We have, like I say, we've gotten 3 new members in the last 5 years. We have 2 younger gentlemen that have children. So that's the other thing about, if you were thinking about joining, you have to be an adult. If for a child, we're not a babysitting service, right. And we have no formal organization or papers, so we have no liability or anything like that. So we would insist that the parent be always there if they're going to bring children that want to be members. And we haven't really gotten a specific age group, but usually we're with like people that are probably maybe at least 8 years old that have some more comprehension of that these aren't just toys. National Model Railroad Association, and it was established back in like 1935, and it sets the standards for the industry. So all the gauges, regardless of what the gauge is or size of the what you're modeling, that they're all standardized. The wheels are standard, the coupling is standardized. So it was made to, so everybody back in the 30s, everybody was making everything any way they wanted to, and nothing was very compatible. So a bunch of people in Milwaukee got together and said, let's provide some standards so people don't, getting into the hobby aren't up against it. And they've been around, they're still very active in now the electronic part of it with all this digital command control standards. They set the standards for that. And so it's an organization of about 15,000. It was more back in the 60s and the 70s, but nowadays a lot of modelers or younger kids or high school kids are not really too into the railroad scene. A few are, but with all the other stuff going on, like internet and games and all that kind of smartphones, all that kind of stuff. There's some interest, but again, it's sort of a waning type of hobby, I would say. Although there's always new products coming out all the time. It's just absolutely amazing the quality of products in all scales. That between like the 60s and the 80s, there was not really any innovation at all. Relevation of plastics came into the scene about 1965 for a lot of this stuff. There was a little bit of a change, because back early on you had to build everything yourself. It came either in kits, and you had to put everything together. I mean, your locomotives and all that, unless you got imported brass from Japan or Korea, but of course those were extremely expensive at that time for most people. There are multiple scales. HO is 1/87th, meaning that one actual foot equals 87 scale feet. And you say, well, that is a very weird ratio. Well, the reason that was established is that the original O scale, and I'm not talking about Lionel, was a 1/4 inch, which was 1/48th. And in the British system, they had a 4 millimeter gauge and a 3.5 millimeter gauge, and the 3.5 millimeter gauge became HO in American parlance. And because it was half the size of O scale, which was very popular before World War II and immediately after, your Lionel stuff is basically is an O gauge size, but it's not a standard gauge. And after World War II, when the development of plastics and better manufacturing machinery came along and things like that, the HO size became very popular, because on a 4x8 piece of plywood, you could have a nice little oval type layout, and you could put it up on a sawhorse and then take it down and leave it inside. Whereas in an O gauge stuff, you need bigger space, and of course everything the bigger gauges. But so anyway, start off with the smallest one that I know of is Z gauge, which is 1/220th, which is very, very small. The engine's about the size of my thumb, or the top front part of my thumb. And then N gauge is 1/160th, that was sort of popular, developed, of course. Again, when you're getting that small, you have to have a motor in there, and I mean has to be very precise engineering to do that. So that's why HO really, after probably the late 50s, really became like 80% of the market was HO. Because I'd say a lot more people could afford that, and the size was a good size. I do model the Milwaukee Road and the Chicago Northwestern Railway. I'm in two scales. I'm in two rail O scale with a Rockford group, and then I have HO. But I I'm a sort of a fan of what's called the transition era, which is the era from the 40s to the 60s, where steam engines were faded out in this country, and the electromotive, EMD, General Motors, and Alco, there was a transition to diesel electric units. So I like the early diesels, the streamline era, where we still had beautiful passenger trains, and people actually liked riding trains cross country before the airline industry took over. So that's the era I'm really like to model. My father got into two rail O scale with one of his high school buddies. I think it was just before the war. There wasn't an awful lot then, but after World War II, when he came home, he got into, because O scale was still probably the most popular. HO was just beginning to be developed, because everything was metal or wood back then. There was no, say, the development of plastics basically came out of the war effort. So I grew up with two rail O scale, and my older brothers, we had what's called a KMT train set, which was also a two rail put together train. It was made in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was called Kuzan model trains. That's what it's called, KMT. And it was a two rail, inexpensive toy, electric toy. And you had a transformer. We had some track. So of course I was the youngest, so I wasn't really allowed to do anything. I was like 3 or 4 when they got that. So we had that at one of our homes. So we couldn't play with Dad's trains, of course, unless he was there. So we had in the basement, we set up our little KMT trains and run those around. But no, I have no railroad background whatsoever, but I was always amazed. I was, like I say, amazed by models.
Hi, my name is William Herzer. I've been with the club since 1997, almost 20 years now. We've been at the library, I guess, almost 10 years running. It's one of the shows I really enjoy. I like dealing with the public. When you go to regular shows, you're dealing mainly with people that are railroad and you have an interest in railroading anyway. So it's nice to bring this to people that don't necessarily have an interest but can see what can be done. I blame my wife for my involvement in this hobby. In 1973, I saw a little N-gauge train set and said, "Oh, that's really cute, a little tiny electric locomotive." And she bought it for me, and it all went bad from there. Now I have something like 80 locomotives, about 300 freight cars, about 50 passenger cars. So whenever she looks at me, I tell her, "It's all your fault. If you hadn't bought me the first set, I'd be in good shape." I've been doing all of that for, well, since I joined the club. I've missed very few of the actual shows that we do. I like the open houses during the summer because we're drawing on a crowd that goes up to the Milton House for the Historical Society, and again, you're dealing with a crowd that's not primarily model railroaders. So they get an idea of what can be done, and you get a lot of good questions, particularly because there's a set of modules that we leave up in our clubhouse that are based around Milton and Milton Junction around 1913. And it's interesting to talk to people about that and show them what used to be in that area that's leveled and gone now. Well, it's at the point now where I run into teenagers who saw the show when they were like 3, 4, you know, and they'll talk about if they're in the hobby still or not. I enjoy when people are up at the clubhouse and they're looking at the Milton modules, because we had a gentleman who talked about when he was a child how he used to climb up on the water tower that used to feed the steam locomotives, and they would like throw water on people walking by and then hide again. So I mean, like I've learned a lot about Milton from people that once they see the modules and they see buildings that they knew were there but are not there anymore, they give you a wealth of information. Best thing about that is sometimes you find out you've got a building on the wrong side of town or the wrong side of the track or something, so you can find a lot if you're modeling what we call a prototype. Myself, I model freelance, and basically it's because I have such an eclectic collection of stuff that it sort of justifies the fact that I buy whatever I like rather than just what the railroad I'm modeling had. The only railroad I buy for the fact that it's the particular railroad is the Central Railroad in New Jersey, because it's the railroad my grandfather retired from. People always ask me if that was what inspired me into model railroading, and it's not really.
No.
You know, it was the typical thing. I had a Lionel train set at one time, and that little N-gauge set that my wife bought me. You know, but again, like I say, I've got it around 65, 70 locomotives, and probably 300 freight cars without a problem. And then, like I say, about 50, somewhere between 50 and 80 passenger cars. Problem is that a lot of them I'm in the process of building. So I usually try not to count anything as an actual part of the inventory until it's running on a track. But years ago, Model Railroader did, every year they do a project railroad, and it's to help inspire people to build their own layout. And they did a railroad they called the Turtle Creek Central. And because we're near Turtle Creek, which is an actual town here, and there's a nice railroad bridge over that down in Chauvière, they did this, and they also came out with a set of decals. And since they came out with the decals, I have been lettering stuff for the Turtle Creek Central. So it's a fictitious road, but I enjoy it. That would be a gentleman in Beloit whose railroad covers the whole of his basement. All of the basement is filled up, and it's quite a large house. I don't know the exact dimensions, but what's interesting is he's modeling what we would call a Granger railroad, handling grain. And when he couldn't get the trucks that he wanted to be hauling grain away from his feed mills and stuff, he started carving them out of balsa wood. And it's just amazing what he's done. And he loves to make little scenes along the railroad, because he has an actual funeral going on, which has the hearse and the group of mourners and them getting ready to lower the casket into the grave. And so all these little scenes that really, add to it. But he also operates it like a real railroad. They do time schedule, and they know where their cars are going and stuff. And it sounds silly, but it's like chess. It's like moving these things in a certain pattern and stuff. Like there's a lot of what we call switching games, where you try to move the cars to where they're supposed to go in the least amount of moves. And it gets really interesting, because it gets frustrating when you forget to throw the turnout or something and everything comes off the track. But I'm not that deep into it. That's what we call the operating side. I'm more what they would call a rail fan. I like to see the stuff run. I could watch it run on the layout in a circle for hours and enjoy it. But operating and moving and switching stuff is fun too. In your home layout, you're looking at, if you're going to do an area that's wooded, you're going to have to make hundreds and hundreds of trees. And you're going to have to make them, because buying them is just way too expensive. One of the secrets with doing the layout or something is finding a cheap way to do it. Like we have a scene on our farm module that's cornfield. But if you look at it real close, it's actually the cocktail toothpicks with a little plastic on the top, because to do that same field, buying the cornfield from a scenery manufacturer would be upwards of $50 to $80. Yeah. And a box of those toothpicks are a lot cheaper. You just spray them green. One of the guys who built some of the nicest modules we have, his trees are the dry filler that you would use when you're doing dry floral arrangements. Sometimes they call them baby's breath, pepper. There's a whole bunch of different names. But that's what he builds his trees out. But they look very realistic. But again, he's found a way to do it, not break the bank, which is difficult in any hobby. You do a modular layout, like our club's layout. Not all of us model the same time period. I model what they call the transition, which is very early diesel and late steam. But we have several guys that model, like the modern stuff, because that's what they're familiar with. They're much younger than I am. But we try to make all the buildings, all the scenery, what we call generic. That it could be like any time, any place.
Any city, USA.
Yep, because it's just, it's nice. But if you start getting too time specific, we have what we call rivet counters in the hobby, who like to come up and tell you what you've done wrong. So to do away with that, we just try to make a very general, very generic feel to the railroad. The only persons that have done different than that were the two gentlemen from Milton, who decided therefore we're going to represent it. And even there, like the railroad station on their module is a model of the one that actually burned down in 1913. The one you see in Milton now, when you go up the old 26, Janesville, road was built to replace that station. And people always tell us that it doesn't look anything like the station that's across the street, and you have to remind them it's not supposed to. But it's interesting then, because once people find out there were two stations, and you can give them a little bit of a history of why the buildings are a certain way that doesn't seem right to them, but then you start explaining what it is. It's interesting. It's really, you find out so much history, you learn so much about the areas when you start modeling. We divide ourselves into like generic, or some guys are very prototype. There's one gentleman, I've seen his layout where he's actually modeling a specific day on this small railroad that was out in Nevada. And I mean, he has a model of every piece of rolling equipment. And when he does a station scene, if you take a picture of that scene, you can compare it to pictures from the actual railroad and see very little difference. It's just amazing. But I mean, that's very prototype, you know. Most of us start out buying whatever hits our eye. That's why we got like roads from the East Coast, roads from the West Coast, and roads in between, because we happen to like the paint scheme or something.
Sure.
I used to buy on price, and I used to tell myself, well, I'll buy this, then I'll strip the paint, and I'll paint it for the railroad I want. And about 20 years later, I'm at a bargain table selling off these locomotives that never quite got to the paint job. But I like it. It's a great hobby. I gotta say that between most of my really good friends come out of model railroading, we're the Boy Scouts. Several of my friends come out of both. Like the gentleman that did the cases out there, his son and my son were both Eagle Scouts out of the same troop. So we've kept up with, you know, when we found out we're both railroad enthusiasts, it's kept our friendship up, even though our boys are separated. So it's a great way for a hobby, great way to meet people. Just the basic motto that you see all the time is model railroading is fun.
Okay.
And it's just interesting, because if you start working around your area, you learn so much about your town and stuff, you won't believe it.
I'd also wish to thank the library for having us here. The staff here has been more than anyone